The arena buzzed with nervous energy as thousands of alien spectators filled the crystalline seats. The Catharan Empire had ruled this sector for over 3 millennia. Their blue-skinned warriors considered the finest duelists in known space. Today, however, something unprecedented was about to happen. A human stood in the center of the combat ring. Sarah Chen adjusted her grip on the simple steel sword, feeling the weight of 10,000 hostile eyes upon her. Across from her, Veltar Shadowbane towered nearly 8 feet tall, his forearms moving in practiced combat forms. Ancient runes carved into his ceremonial blade glowed with pale blue light, pulsing in rhythm with his twin hearts. You dishonor this sacred ground with your presence. Mammal! Veltar's voice carried the arrogance of centuries of genetic superiority. The Catharan blade song has never known defeat. Your species should have remained in the dirt where we found you. Sarah said nothing. She had learned long ago that words meant little in moments like these. The human colony on Kepler 442b had been peaceful, nothing more than farmers and researchers trying to build a new life among the stars. Then the Catharans arrived with their taxation demands, their slavery contracts, their casual cruelty toward what they considered lesser beings. The duel had been her idea. Ancient Catharan law allowed for trial by combat, even for off-worlders. If she won, her people would be granted full citizenship rights and protection under imperial law. If she lost, the remaining humans would be sold into the fighting pits of Velgoth Prime. The ceremonial gong echoed across the arena. The duel had begun. Veltar moved with liquid grace, his primary arms wielding the runic blade while his secondary limbs prepared throwing knives. He had fought in over 200 duels and never once been wounded. The runes on his sword flared brighter, ancient technology that enhanced speed, strength, and reaction time beyond natural limits. Sarah stepped backward, deflecting the first lightning-fast strike. The force nearly knocked the sword from her hands. Veltar's blade hummed through the air, leaving trails of blue energy. Each swing could have cleaved her in half. See how the primitive struggles, Veltar called to the crowd, spinning his blade in complex patterns. This is why humans serve and Catharans rule. The spectators roared their approval. Sarah could see the disappointment in the human section, a small cluster of her fellow colonists who had somehow scraped together enough credits to attend. They had put their faith in her and she was clearly outmatched. Veltar pressed his attack, forcing Sarah into a defensive retreat around the ring. His runic blade seemed to anticipate her movements, striking from impossible angles. She managed to parry most strikes, but several scoring cuts appeared on her arms and shoulders. Blue blood from Veltar's weapon mixed with her red human blood on the arena floor. You fight well for a mammal, Veltar admitted, breathing only slightly harder. But this ends now. He raised his blade high, the runes blazing like miniature stars. This was the killing stroke, the move that had ended every duel in his favor. The crowd held its breath. Sarah saw the strike coming and knew she couldn't block it. Instead, she did something that violated every rule of Catharan combat doctrine. She stepped forward inside his guard and grabbed his secondary right arm. As his main blade came down, she twisted, using his own momentum against him. The runic sword bit deep into her left shoulder, but her desperate maneuver had worked. Veltar was off balance, and for the first time in the duel, Sarah had an opening. Her steel blade, simple and unadorned, sliced across his right hand. It was a shallow cut, barely drawing blood, but the symbolism was enormous. No one had wounded Veltar in single combat for over 50 years. The crowd erupted in shocked silence. Veltar stared at his hand, blue blood dripping steadily onto the arena floor. In that moment of disbelief, something impossible happened. Sarah's plain steel sword began to glow, not with the cold blue light of Catharan technology, but with something warmer, something alive. Intricate patterns of light crawled along the blade's surface, forming symbols that no one in the arena recognized. What sorcery is this? Veltar demanded, raising his own weapon defensively. Sarah was as surprised as anyone. She had carried this sword from Earth, a family heirloom passed down through generations. Her great-grandfather had claimed it was special, but she had always assumed he meant sentimentally. Now, as alien writing flowed like liquid fire across the metal, she realized there was much about human history that had been forgotten. The light from her blade grew brighter, and something extraordinary began to happen in the crowd. Every Catharan in the arena, from the lowest servants to the noble houses, suddenly cried out in pain. They clutched their heads, their blue skin paling to an almost white shade. The songs, someone screamed. The ancestor songs are silent. Sarah didn't understand what was happening, but she could feel power flowing through the sword into her body. Her wounds stopped bleeding. Her fatigue vanished. She felt stronger and faster than she ever had before. Veltar stumbled backward, his runic blade flickering and dying. "Impossible," he whispered. "The deep code, it's responding to your weapon. But that's impossible. Humans are barely evolved mammals. You have no connection to the ancient powers." The arena descended into chaos as Kitharans throughout the crowd began collapsing. Their technological implants sparked and failed. Their runic weapons went dark. Whatever was happening to Sarah's sword was somehow affecting every piece of Kitharan technology in sight. Sarah looked at her blade, watching the alien symbols pulse with warm golden light. She didn't know what was happening, but she could feel that this was only the beginning. Something had awakened, something that would change everything humanity thought it knew about their place in the universe. The duel was far from over, but already the rules had changed completely. The golden light from Sarah's sword pulsed stronger, and with each pulse more Kitharans fell to their knees. The proud warrior race that had conquered half the galaxy was being brought low by a simple human farmer with an old earth blade. Veltar tried to raise his weapon, but the runic blade remained dead. His enhanced strength was gone, his technological advantages stripped away. For the first time in his life, he faced an opponent on equal terms. "What have you done?" he gasped, his voice no longer carrying the confident arrogance of before. "The deep code has been dormant for 10,000 years. No living being should be able to activate it." Sarah didn't have answers. She only knew that the sword felt alive in her hands, warm and eager. The symbols running along its length weren't just glowing anymore. They were moving, flowing like liquid light from hilt to tip in complex patterns that seemed almost like writing. Around the arena, Kitharan technology was failing catastrophically. The floating camera drones crashed to the ground. The energy shields protecting the noble houses flickered and died. Even the artificial gravity generators struggled to maintain their output. In the human section, Sarah's people watched in amazement as their oppressors writhed in apparent agony. Dr. Marcus Webb, the colony's historian, stood with his mouth open. He had studied ancient human mythology for decades, but he had never believed the old stories could be literally true. The ancestor weapons, he whispered to himself. Dear God, the legends were real. On the arena floor, Sarah advanced toward Veltar. The Kitharan warrior stumbled backward, his forearms trembling. Without his technological enhancements, he looked almost fragile. Please, he said, the word foreign to his tongue. I yield. The duel is yours. But Sarah wasn't listening to him anymore. The sword was showing her things, visions of the past that flooded her mind with impossible clarity. She saw Earth as it had been 50,000 years ago, when humanity was young and the galaxy was very different. In her vision, she watched as beings of pure energy descended from the stars. They looked like humans but moved with impossible grace, their eyes holding the light of ancient wisdom. These beings had come to Earth not as conquerors, but as teachers. We are the progenitors, their leader said in the vision, his voice echoing across time. We have seeded the galaxy with life, and now we gift you with the tools to reclaim what was always yours. The vision showed her the forging of weapons, not just swords, but artifacts of incredible power. Each one was bonded to the genetic code of humanity, waiting for the day when their descendants would spread to the stars and encounter the races that had forgotten their origins. The Kitharans were our children once, the progenitor explained, as were the Vegan Empire, the Centauri hegemony, and all the others who now rule through force. But they have forgotten their purpose. They have become corrupted by power and lost their way. Sarah gasped as the vision ended, finding herself back in the arena. Veltar was on his knees now, blue blood streaming from his nose and ears. Throughout the stadium, every Kitharan was experiencing the same thing, the awakening of genetic memories they had spent millennia trying to suppress. You remember now, don't you? Sarah said, her voice carrying new authority. You remember who you really are? Veltar looked up at her with eyes full of confusion and dawning terror. We were gardeners, caretakers. The galaxy was our preserve, and we were meant to nurture life, not dominate it. The arena fell silent except for the soft sobbing of Kitharans as long-suppressed memories flooded back. They remembered their true history, how they had been part of a great galactic civilization based on cooperation and growth, how they had fallen from grace, choosing conquest over cultivation, Slavery over symbiosis. Sarah's sword pulsed again, and this time the golden light spread outward in a wave that encompassed the entire planet. Every piece of Kitharan technology on the world shuddered and went dark. The massive war fleets in orbit found their weapons systems failing. The planetary defense grid simply shut down. But something else was happening too. Hidden beneath the surface of the planet, ancient machines were awakening. Machines built by the progenitors and left dormant for millennia, waiting for the right genetic key to activate them. Dr. Webb felt his personal communicator buzz. Reports were coming in from human colonies across the galaxy. Everywhere humanity had spread, people were finding artifacts that had never worked before suddenly blazing to life. Ancient ruins on dozens of worlds were lighting up like beacons. Sarah lowered her sword, finally understanding the magnitude of what had just occurred. The duel had been about more than just the freedom of one small colony. It had been the trigger for something much larger, the return of humanity to its rightful place as inheritors of the galaxy. Veltar struggled to his feet, his massive frame shaking. "What happens now?" he asked. "We have ruled for 3,000 years. Our entire civilization is built on the subjugation of others. Now you remember what you were supposed to be," Sarah replied, "and you choose whether to reclaim that heritage or continue down the path of corruption." Around the arena, Kitharans were helping each other stand. Many were weeping openly, overwhelmed by the weight of racial memories. They had been living a lie for so long that the truth felt like a physical blow. Sarah looked up at the human section where her people watched in wonder. They had come here expecting to witness her death. Instead, they had seen the beginning of a new age. The golden light from her sword began to fade, but it didn't disappear entirely. It settled into the metal, becoming part of the blade itself. Sarah could feel its presence, patient and ready, waiting for whatever challenges lay ahead, because this was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, other races would soon learn that the age of conquest was ending. The children of the progenitors were awakening, and the galaxy would never be the same. News of the duel spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that even the Kitharan Empire couldn't control. Within hours, every major civilization had heard the impossible story. A human had defeated their greatest warrior and somehow caused the collapse of their technology. Sarah stood in the medical bay of the human embassy, getting her wounds treated while trying to process what had happened. The cut on her shoulder had healed completely during the fight, leaving only a thin white scar. Dr. Webb sat beside her, scrolling through reports on his tablet with growing excitement. "It's happening everywhere," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Tau Ceti, Wolf 359, Proxima Centauri. Every human settlement is reporting the same thing. Ancient artifacts are activating. Ruins that archaeologists have studied for decades are suddenly coming to life." Sarah touched the sword lying across her lap. It looked ordinary now, just old steel and leather wrapping, but she could feel the power dormant within it, like a sleeping dragon waiting to wake. "The Vegan Empire has gone completely silent," Dr. Webb continued. "Their entire communication network just stopped working 6 hours ago. Same thing with the Centauri hegemony and the Rigel Consortium. Every major power except humanity is experiencing massive system failures." Through the window, Sarah could see Kitharan citizens wandering the streets below in a daze. Many sat in small groups, sharing memories that had been locked away in their genetic code for thousands of years. The proud warrior culture was crumbling as they remembered their origins as peaceful gardeners and scientists. Ambassador Chen, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, entered the room with a grim expression. As the highest-ranking human official in Kitharan space, he had been fielding calls from governments across the galaxy. "The situation is getting worse," he said. 3 different empires are blaming us for some kind of attack. They think we've deployed a new weapon that specifically targets their technology, haven't we?" Sarah asked quietly. The ambassador looked at her sword with nervous eyes. "I honestly don't know. What exactly happened out there?" Sarah tried to explain about the visions, the memories of beings called progenitors who had apparently seeded the galaxy with life millions of years ago. She told them about the awakening of genetic memories in the Kitharans, their sudden recollection of a very different past than what their history books claimed. "It sounds like science fiction," Ambassador Chen said when she finished. "So did faster than light travel until we figured it out. Dr. Webb pointed out. Sarah, I've been researching your family history. Your great-grandfather wasn't just a collector of old weapons. He was part of a group that called themselves the Keepers, people who preserved certain artifacts and stories that they claimed would be important someday. Sarah frowned. My great-grandfather was a farmer in Ohio. He never mentioned anything about being part of some secret organization. That's because they weren't secret, just forgotten. Look at this. Dr. Webb showed her a document on his tablet. The Keepers maintained detailed records of families chosen to carry specific artifacts. According to this, there are weapons like yours hidden in museums, private collections, and family heirlooms all across human space. The implications were staggering. If other humans carried similar weapons, and if they were all awakening at the same time, then what had happened in the arena was just the beginning of something much larger. A communication alert chimed, and Ambassador Chen activated the holographic display. The image of Fleet Admiral Harrison appeared, her expression a mixture of concern and excitement. Ambassador, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 different Kitharan battle groups. Their weapon systems are completely non-functional, and they're requesting safe passage out of our territory. More importantly, we're getting similar reports from human colonies throughout the galaxy. Sarah stood up, sliding the sword into its sheath. Admiral, what's the status of the other major powers? That's where things get interesting, Harrison replied. We're detecting massive energy signatures from the core worlds of every major empire. Something is happening to their populations, something that's causing widespread civil unrest and government collapse. They're remembering, Sarah said quietly, just like the Kitharans remembered. These empires were all built on lies about their origins. The Admiral nodded slowly. Our xenoarchaeology teams have been analyzing the data from your duel. The energy signature from your weapon matches readings we've been getting from progenitor ruins for decades, but at a much higher amplitude. It's as if your sword acted as a key, unlocking systems that have been dormant for millennia. Dr. Webb pulled up another document. I've been cross-referencing legends from across human space. There are stories from dozens of different cultures about weapons left behind by Skyfathers or Star ancestors, beings who came from the heavens and gave humans special gifts before departing. And now those gifts are awakening, Sarah said. The question is, what happens next? As if in response to her words, the embassy's communication system activated on its own. The display flickered and shifted, showing not the familiar interface but something else. Symbols that flowed and pulsed with the same golden light Sarah had seen on her sword. A voice spoke from the speakers, though no one was transmitting. It sounded human but carried an otherworldly quality that made everyone in the room take a step back. Children of Earth, the voice said, the time of awakening has come. For too long, the galaxy has been ruled by those who have forgotten their purpose. The ancient compact is broken, and the scattered children must choose their path. The symbols on the display coalesced into recognizable star charts showing human space and the surrounding empires. Red markers appeared on dozens of worlds, pulsing in rhythm with the voice. The inheritor weapons have awakened across the galaxy. Each carries within it the power to restore what was lost or to forge something new. But power without wisdom is the path to the same corruption that has befallen the others. Sarah felt her sword grow warm against her side. The voice seemed to be speaking directly to her, though she knew the others could hear it too. Sarah Chen of Earth, first inheritor. The choices you make in the coming days will shape the future of all life in this galaxy. Use the gifts wisely, for the test has only just begun. The display went dark, leaving the room in stunned silence. Outside, the first ships began arriving. Human vessels from across the galaxy, drawn by reports of the miracle weapon and the collapse of the great empires. But they weren't the only ones coming. Refugee fleets from a dozen different species were fleeing the chaos spreading through their home territories, seeking shelter in human space. Sarah walked to the window and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, other humans were discovering that they carried weapons of unimaginable power. The question was whether humanity would use that power to build a better galaxy or simply become another empire like those that were now falling. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. She had won a duel to save her colony, but in doing so she had apparently triggered the collapse of galactic civilization itself. The test, as the voice had said, was just beginning. 3 weeks after the duel, Sarah found herself aboard the flagship of the largest human fleet ever assembled. Representatives from every human colony, research station, and outpost had gathered at the neutral zone between human and Catharan space. What they discovered there changed everything humanity thought it knew about their own history. The ruins floated in the void between stars, a massive structure that hadn't been there a month ago. It appeared to be growing, expanding as more human ships arrived, as if their presence was somehow feeding its construction. The architecture was impossible, seeming to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could process. Preliminary scans show the structure is composed of materials that don't appear in any known periodic table, reported Chief Science Officer Martinez. It's generating its own gravity field and atmosphere. More importantly, it's broadcasting a signal that only human technology can detect. Sarah stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Prometheus, watching as shuttles ferried people to and from the mysterious structure. In the 3 weeks since the awakening, 47 other humans had discovered inheritor weapons among their possessions. Each weapon was different: swords, staffs, even what appeared to be a ceremonial hammer that now blazed with inner fire. Dr. Webb approached her with a datapad full of new information. His research had become critical to understanding what was happening across the galaxy. The situation is deteriorating rapidly in the core territories, he reported. The Vegan Empire has split into 12 different factions, all claiming to be the legitimate government. The Centauri hegemony is facing full-scale revolution, as their worker castes remember being equals rather than slaves. And the Catharan Empire is in complete chaos. Sarah nodded grimly. The awakening of genetic memories wasn't just affecting the ruling classes. Entire populations were remembering different versions of their history. Civilizations that had been built on conquest and domination were collapsing as people recalled being peaceful scientists and explorers. What about the other species? She asked. The ones who weren't part of the original empires? That's where it gets complicated, Dr. Webb replied. Species like the Altarians, the Deneb Collective, and the Tau whales are actually helping the awakening process. They've been hiding their true history for millennia, pretending to be primitive to avoid drawing attention from the empires. Turns out they're all descendants of progenitor colonies, too. The scope of the deception was staggering. The entire galactic political structure had been built on lies, with supposedly primitive species actually being the secret keepers of ancient knowledge. A chime indicated an incoming message from the structure. Admiral Harrison's voice came over the communication system. All inheritor weapon bearers, please report to the central chamber immediately. Something significant is happening. Sarah made her way through the corridors of the impossible structure, past walls that seemed to shimmer with their own light. Other humans walked beside her, each carrying their own awakened artifact. She recognized some faces from news reports. Dr. Amanda Price from Proxima Station with her crystal staff, Captain John Morrison from the Frontier Worlds with his blazing war axe, Dr. Lisa Park from the research facility at Wolf 359 with her ornate shield. They entered a vast circular chamber where dozens of humans had already gathered. At the center stood a raised platform with what appeared to be a map of the galaxy, but not as they knew it. This map showed connections between star systems, flowing lines of energy that linked worlds across impossible distances. Welcome, inheritors, said a familiar voice. The same presence that had spoken through the embassy communications system was here, though Sarah couldn't see its source. You have gathered at the heart of memory, a place that exists between dimensions, waiting for the day when the scattered children would return. The map began to change, showing the galaxy as it had been millions of years ago. Worlds connected by networks of energy. Peaceful civilizations working together to explore and understand the universe. It was beautiful and terrible in its perfection. This was the golden age, the voice continued, when the children of the progenitors worked as one to unlock the mysteries of existence. But power corrupts and ambition destroys. The network was broken, the connections severed, and the galaxy fell into darkness. Sarah watched as the map showed the collapse, worlds going dark, the energy lines severing, and the rise of the warlike empires that had dominated galactic politics for thousands of years. The inheritor weapons were created as keys, the voice explained, tools that could restore the network when the time was right. But they require choice. The power to restore the Golden Age also carries the power to destroy everything. Dr. Price stepped forward, her crystal staff glowing brightly. What exactly are you asking us to do? Choose, came the simple reply. You can use the weapons to restore the ancient network, bringing peace and cooperation back to the galaxy. But doing so will eliminate the independence that each species has fought to maintain. All will be connected, all will be one. Captain Morrison hefted his axe, its blade crackling with energy. And the alternative? Use the weapons to forge a new path. Maintain the independence of species and worlds, but accept that conflict and suffering will continue. The galaxy will remain divided, but it will remain free. The weight of the choice settled over the assembled humans like a physical presence. They weren't just deciding the fate of humanity. They were choosing the future of every sentient being in the galaxy. Sarah touched her sword's hilt, feeling the power that waited within. How much time do we have to decide? Time is running out faster than you know, the voice replied, and the galactic map shifted to show current events. Red zones marked areas of complete governmental collapse. Yellow zones showed regions in active revolt. Only a few green zones remained stable, most of them in human space. The awakening has triggered a cascade effect. Without the lies and oppression that held the empires together, they are consuming themselves. Soon there will be nothing left but chaos and war, unless a new order is established. Dr. Webb studied the map with growing alarm. You're saying we have to choose between forced unity and total collapse? Not forced, the voice corrected. Chosen. The network can only function with willing participants. But the choice must be made by all inheritors acting together. Unity of purpose, even if not unity of thought. Sarah looked around at her fellow humans, seeing the same uncertainty in their faces that she felt. They had been farmers, scientists, traders, and explorers just weeks ago. Now they held the fate of the galaxy in their hands. There has to be another way, she said finally. Some path between total unity and total chaos. The map flickered, showing new possibilities. Perhaps, the voice said, but it would require wisdom beyond what any single species possesses. It would require cooperation between former enemies, trust between those who have known only war. Sarah made her decision. And then let's find out if we're worthy of the power we've inherited. She drew her sword, and around the chamber other inheritors revealed their weapons. The artifacts blazed with light, and the map of the galaxy began to change, showing not what had been or what could be, but what might yet become. The real test was about to begin. The response came faster than anyone expected. Within 6 hours of the inheritors gathering, quantum communication arrays across the galaxy lit up with incoming messages. But these weren't from the collapsing empires. They came from species that had remained hidden for millennia. Sarah stood in the communication center of the Heart of Memory, watching as holographic figures materialized around the chamber. The first to appear was an elderly being who looked almost human but with silver skin that seemed to hold starlight within it. I am Keeper Velanor of the Altarian Circles, the figure said, bowing slightly. We have waited 3,000 years for this awakening. Our archives contain the complete history of the progenitor network, preserved since the last collapse. Next came a crystalline being whose body seemed to be made of living gemstone. Speaker Harmony of Deep Waters, representing the Tau Whale Collective. Our pods have maintained the deep memory songs throughout the Dark Ages. We remember the old ways. More figures appeared, representatives of species that humanity had barely heard of, all revealed to be descendants of the original progenitor civilization. Sarah realized they were witnessing the reformation of an alliance that had been broken for millennia. Dr. Webb was frantically taking notes, his historian's instincts overwhelmed by the flood of new information. This changes everything we thought we knew about galactic history, he whispered to Sarah. These species weren't primitive at all. They were the survivors, the ones who remembered the truth. Keeper Velanor stepped forward, his starlight skin pulsing with emotion. The inheritor weapons were not just tools of power, he explained. They were designed to test whether a species was ready to rejoin the greater community. Your awakening has proven that humanity possesses the wisdom to wield such responsibility. Sarah felt the weight of expectation from every being in the chamber. We haven't proven anything yet, she said. We don't even know what path we want to choose. But you have begun the choosing, Speaker Harmony of Deep Waters replied, her crystalline voice ringing like musical chimes. The old empires built their power on the suppression of truth. You have chosen to seek truth, even when it complicates your decisions. Captain Morrison stepped forward, his axe held across his chest. What about the species that aren't descended from your progenitors? Do they have any say in this choice? It was a crucial question. Not every intelligent species in the galaxy traced their origins to the ancient network. Some had evolved independently, and many had been uplifted by the empires as slave races. A new figure materialized, something that looked like a cross between an octopus and a tree, its tentacle branches swaying gently. "I speak for the Rigel Undergrowth Collective," it said in a voice like rustling leaves. "We are not progenitor-born, but we have felt the touch of the awakening. Your human weapons sing to something in our deep DNA, something that calls us to growth rather than conquest." More independent species began joining the communication, each reporting similar experiences. The awakening wasn't just affecting progenitor descendants. It was touching any species that retained the capacity for cooperation over domination. Sarah began to see the shape of a possible solution. "What if the choice isn't between forced unity and total chaos?" she asked. "What if we're looking at this wrong?" Dr. Price raised her crystal staff and the galactic map shifted to show her thoughts. "You mean create multiple networks? Regional alliances based on compatible values rather than one universal system?" "Exactly," Sarah said, her sword beginning to glow as the idea took shape. The old empires failed because they tried to force diversity into rigid hierarchies. But what if we created a galaxy where different approaches could coexist? Keeper Valaner's expression showed surprise and approval. A confederation of networks rather than a single unified field. Ambitious and untested, but possible. The discussion that followed lasted for 18 hours. Representatives of dozens of species debated the practicalities of such an arrangement. There would be trade networks for peaceful commerce, research networks for scientific collaboration, defense networks for mutual protection, and cultural networks for artistic exchange. But not every species wanted to join any network at all. As reports came in from across the galaxy, it became clear that some civilizations preferred complete independence, even if it meant giving up the benefits of cooperation. "The Andromedans have declared their intention to withdraw from all galactic affairs," reported Admiral Harrison during one of the briefing sessions. "They're pulling back to their home systems and cutting all outside contact." Sarah nodded. "That's their choice. The point of this new arrangement is that every species gets to decide their own level of participation. The most difficult discussions centered around the former Empire worlds. Billions of beings who had lived under authoritarian rule were now experiencing genetic memories of freedom and cooperation. Many were embracing their rediscovered heritage, but others were clinging to the old ways. "The former Kitharan core worlds are requesting human intervention," reported Dr. Webb. "They're experiencing complete governmental collapse as different factions fight over whose version of recovered memories is correct." Sarah looked at her fellow inheritors. They had the power to impose order through force. The awakened weapons could compel obedience from most progenitor-descended species. But using that power would make them no different from the fallen empires. "We help them, but only if they ask," she decided. "And our help comes in the form of mediation and support, not control." Dr. Price disagreed. "Sarah, people are dying out there. We have the power to stop the chaos immediately." "And then what?" Sarah countered. "We become the new overlords? The weapons might be tools of unity, but forced unity isn't unity at all. It's just slavery with better PR." The debate revealed a fundamental split among the inheritors. Some believed their power came with the obligation to use it decisively, while others argued that the greatest wisdom lay in restraint. Captain Morrison proposed a compromise. "We form intervention teams, but only for worlds that specifically request help. And our role is purely advisory. We help them find their own solutions rather than imposing ours." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a beginning. Over the following weeks, small teams of inheritors began traveling to crisis zones across the galaxy. They didn't come as conquerors or saviors, but as facilitators, using their weapons not to compel obedience but to create spaces where honest dialogue could occur. The results were mixed. Some worlds embraced the new cooperative model and quickly stabilized. Others rejected all outside influence and chose to face their problems alone. A few attempted to manipulate the inheritors for their own advantage, only to discover that the weapons responded poorly to deception. Sarah found herself on a transport heading toward the former Kitharan capital, where Veltar, the warrior she had defeated in the duel, had requested her personal assistance. The planet was in the midst of civil war, as different factions claimed to represent the true Kithaeron heritage. As their ship entered orbit, Sarah could see fires burning on the surface below. The proud civilization that had once ruled a quarter of the galaxy was tearing itself apart, as the truth of their origins clashed with thousands of years of imperial propaganda. "Ready?" asked Dr. Webb, who had volunteered to accompany her. Sarah touched her sword's hilt, feeling the warm presence of the weapon that had started this galactic transformation. As ready as anyone can be to help rebuild a civilization. The hardest part of wielding ultimate power, she was learning, was knowing when not to use it. The Kithaeron capital looked nothing like the proud imperial center Sarah remembered from news broadcasts. Smoke rose from burning government buildings while armed groups patrolled streets littered with the debris of a civilization at war with itself. 3 different factions claimed legitimate rule, each backed by conflicting interpretations of their rediscovered genetic memories. Sarah and Dr. Webb were escorted through the chaos by Veltar himself. Though the former champion looked haggard and worn, the proud warrior who had once dominated the arena now moved like a being, carrying an impossible weight. "Thank you for coming," he said as their transport navigated around a burning memorial to some long-dead emperor. "I know you have no obligation to help us, especially after what we did to your people." Sarah watched civilians flee from another outbreak of fighting in the distance. "Everyone deserves a chance to find their path forward," she replied, "even former oppressors." The meeting was held in what had once been the Planetary Senate building, now occupied by an uneasy coalition of the 3 major factions. The traditionalists wanted to maintain imperial structure while acknowledging their true history. The purists demanded a complete return to their pre-imperial origins as gardener scientists. The realists argued for a pragmatic approach that blended old and new. "The awakening has revealed 3 different sets of genetic memories," explained Veltar as they entered the heavily guarded chamber. "Our scientists believe this is because the Kithaerons were actually multiple species that were artificially merged during the imperial period. Now that the old mental conditioning is broken, each group is reverting to its original nature." Sarah felt her sword warm against her side as they entered the room where representatives of all 3 factions waited. The weapon could sense the deep emotional turmoil of everyone present, anger, fear, hope, and desperation all swirling together in a toxic mixture. Speaker Dalzeth of the Traditionalists stood first, her bearing still carrying echoes of imperial authority. "Inheritor Chen, we seek your guidance in resolving this crisis. Our people need leadership, and the awakened weapons are clearly tools of authority." "No," countered Healer Morden of the Purists, his blue skin pale with emotion. "The weapons awakened to break the chains of authority, not forge new ones. We must return to our origins as equals without hierarchy or dominance." Commander Velkas of the Realists simply looked tired. "With respect to my colleagues, both approaches ignore practical reality. We have billions of citizens who need food, shelter, and security. Ideological purity won't keep the lights on." Sarah walked to the center of the room, feeling the weight of expectations from all sides. These people wanted her to choose for them, to use her weapon's power to impose a solution. It would be simple. The sword could compel cooperation, force unity through spiritual domination. Instead, she set the weapon on the table between them. "I'm not here to rule you," she said quietly. "I'm here to help you rule yourselves." The room erupted in protests and arguments. Speaker Dalzeth demanded to know how they could maintain order without clear authority. Healer Morden insisted that any hierarchical structure would inevitably lead back to oppression. Commander Velkas pointed out that their infrastructure was collapsing while they debated philosophy. Sarah let them argue for nearly an hour before speaking again. "You're all right," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "And you're all wrong." She touched her sword's hilt not to compel but to illuminate. Golden light filled the room, and suddenly everyone could feel what the others were feeling, their fears, hopes, and genuine desire to help their people. "Your species wasn't originally 3 separate groups," Sarah explained, drawing on knowledge the weapon provided. "You were one people with 3 essential roles: leaders to organize, healers to nurture, and builders to create. The Empire corrupted those roles into dominance hierarchies, but the original purpose was cooperation. The light from her sword showed them visions of their true past, Kithaerons working together, each group contributing their unique strengths to solve common problems. Leaders who served rather than ruled, healers who guided rather than controlled, builders who created for all rather than just the elite. The awakening isn't giving you different memories, Sarah continued. It's showing you different aspects of what you were meant to be together. Veltar stepped forward, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're saying we need all three approaches working together rather than choosing just one? Sarah nodded. Your planet needs immediate practical solutions. That's the builder way. It needs healing from generations of imposed trauma. That's the healer way. And it needs coordination to prevent chaos. That's the leader way. But none of those roles requires dominance over the others. The discussion that followed was different from the earlier arguments. Instead of each faction trying to impose their vision on the others, they began exploring how their approaches could complement each other. The realists had practical expertise in maintaining infrastructure. The purists understood the psychological healing needed to overcome imperial conditioning. The traditionalists possessed organizational skills necessary for large-scale coordination. Over the following days, Sarah watched as the three groups slowly learned to work together. It wasn't easy. Thousands of years of hierarchical thinking couldn't be overcome in a few conversations. But the foundation was there, waiting to be rediscovered. The breakthrough came when a massive earthquake struck the planet's southern continent. Traditional imperial response would have been to send military forces to maintain order, while emergency services dealt with the disaster. Instead, all three factions immediately began cooperating, each contributing their strengths without regard for political boundaries. This is how it's supposed to work, Veltar said as they watched rescue efforts coordinated through a blend of traditional leadership, purist healing teams, and realist infrastructure repair. Not one group ruling the others, but all groups serving the whole. Sarah smiled, feeling her sword's contentment with the developing solution. But she also sensed something else, a disturbance in the galactic network that the other inheritors were building. Dr. Webb approached with a concerned expression. Sarah, we're getting reports from other intervention sites. Not all the former Empire worlds are responding as well as the Kitherans. Some species seem to be rejecting the awakening entirely. The news was troubling. While some worlds had embraced their rediscovered heritage and others had chosen isolation, a third group was actively fighting against the genetic memories. They were using advanced technology to suppress the awakening effects, preferring the certainties of imperial dominance to the uncertainties of cooperative freedom. The Vegan core worlds have declared war on any species showing awakening symptoms, Dr. Webb reported. They're claiming it's some kind of human bioweapon designed to weaken non-human civilizations. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's climate. The awakening was supposed to bring peace and cooperation, but some groups were twisting it into an excuse for even greater conflict. We need to call an emergency meeting of all the inheritors, she decided. The situation is becoming more complex than we anticipated. As their transport lifted off from the Kitheran capital, Sarah looked down at a world that was slowly healing itself through rediscovered cooperation. It was beautiful to see, but she knew it was just one success among many failures. The galaxy was changing, but change was never simple or universally welcomed. The real test of the inheritor weapons and their bearers was yet to come, not against fallen empires or awakening allies, but against those who would use fear of change to justify even greater oppression. The golden age they were trying to build would have to be defended, and Sarah was beginning to understand that some people would always choose familiar chains over unfamiliar freedom. 2 years had passed since the duel that changed everything. Sarah stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Harmony Station, watching as ships from dozens of species docked at the massive cooperative facility orbiting the former neutral zone. What had once been empty space between hostile empires was now the beating heart of a new galactic civilization. The transformation had not been easy or universal. The galaxy was now divided into 3 distinct regions: the cooperative networks where former progenitor descendants worked together, the independent zones where species chose isolation, and the resistance territories where the old imperial mindset had reformed into something even more aggressive than before. The quarterly report from the Network Council, Dr. Webb said, approaching with a tablet full of statistics that would have seemed impossible just years before. Trade between cooperative worlds is up 300%. Scientific research sharing has eliminated duplicate projects on over 2,000 research initiatives, and the mediation system has resolved 96% of disputes without violence. Sarah smiled, but her expression remained troubled. And the vegan resistance? Dr. Webb's tone darkened. They've conquered 8 more systems this quarter, using propaganda that claims the awakening is a human plot to dominate the galaxy. Their technology has become more aggressive as they've suppressed their genetic memories completely. They're essentially turning themselves into living weapons. The irony was bitter. In trying to create a more peaceful galaxy, the inheritors had inadvertently triggered the formation of a militaristic faction that was more dangerous than any previous empire. The vegan resistance had allied with other species that rejected the awakening, forming a confederation built on the suppression of cooperative instincts. Any word from Captain Morrison's team? Sarah asked. They managed to evacuate the Rigel colonies before the resistance arrived, Dr. Webb reported. But we lost contact with the archaeological expedition at Wolf 359. Intelligence suggests they were captured rather than killed. Sarah touched her sword's hilt, feeling the weapon's patient strength. The inheritor weapons had grown more powerful over the past 2 years, fed by the growing network of cooperation they had helped create. But they had also revealed a terrible truth. Power used to force good outcomes was still just power, and those who rejected goodness could always choose to embrace its opposite. The council is meeting in an hour, Dr. Webb reminded her. They're going to ask for a direct military response to the resistance. Sarah nodded grimly. This was the moment she had been dreading since the awakening began. The cooperative networks were strong enough now to defend themselves, but doing so would require using the inheritor weapons in ways they had tried to avoid. The council chamber was packed with representatives from nearly 100 worlds. The diversity was staggering. Crystalline beings from the Tau Whale Collective sat beside the plant-like entities of the Undergrowth Collective, while humans shared space with the silver-skinned Altarians and dozens of other species that had emerged from hiding. At the center of the discussion was Admiral Harrison, her expression grim as she presented tactical data. The Resistance fleet is moving toward the core network hub at Alpha Centauri. If they succeed in destroying that facility, it will cripple communication between 43 cooperative worlds. Keeper Velinor of the Altarians spoke first. The defensive potential of the inheritor weapons has grown substantially. A coordinated response could stop the Resistance fleet without significant casualties to either side. But at what cost? Asked Speaker Harmony of Deep Waters. The moment we use the weapons to impose our will on others, we become what we sought to replace. Dr. Price stood, her crystal staff pulsing with nervous energy. With respect, Speaker, we're not talking about imposing our will. We're talking about defending ourselves and protecting innocent civilians. The debate that followed echoed arguments that had been raging across the networks for months. Some believed the inheritor weapons should be used decisively to end the threat posed by the Resistance. Others argued that any use of the weapons for military purposes would corrupt their true purpose. Sarah listened to all sides before standing. The chamber fell silent, waiting for the words of the first inheritor, the human whose duel had started this galactic transformation. 2 years ago, I cut Veltar's hand in a duel, she began. In that moment, I thought I was fighting for the freedom of one small colony. I had no idea I was triggering changes that would reshape the entire galaxy. She drew her sword, and golden light filled the chamber. But this time, the light carried visions of possible futures, some bright, some dark, all dependent on the choices made in this moment. The Resistance believes we're trying to dominate them, Sarah continued. They're wrong, but their fear isn't entirely unjustified. The inheritor weapons are tools of incredible power, and power always carries the risk of corruption. The visions shifted, showing potential outcomes. The networks defending themselves successfully but becoming gradually more militaristic. The Resistance destroying enough cooperative infrastructure to fragment the new alliances. A galactic war that could last for centuries. But there was another possibility, one that required the greatest courage of all. What if we're approaching this wrong? Sarah asked. What if instead of fighting the Resistance, we show them they have nothing to fear from us? The chamber erupted in shocked protests. Admiral Harrison stood immediately. Sarah, they're not going to stop their attacks just because we ask nicely. They've already made it clear they intend to destroy everything we've built. Then we let them try, Sarah said quietly. The simple statement sent a ripple of disbelief through the assembled representatives. Sarah raised her sword higher and the golden light intensified. Not the infrastructure, she clarified. Not the people. But we let them attack the symbol they fear most, us. The inheritors themselves. Dr. Price understood first, her face paling. You're talking about allowing them to attack the heart of memory. To try to destroy the weapons themselves. Sarah nodded. The heart exists between dimensions. It's essentially indestructible by conventional means. But more importantly, it will show them exactly what the weapons really are. Not tools of domination, but keys to cooperation that only work when used freely. The plan that emerged from the following discussions was audacious in its simplicity. The inheritors would withdraw to the heart of memory and invite the resistance to attack them directly. The cooperative networks would continue to function through their existing non-weapon infrastructure, proving that their alliance didn't depend on superior force. When the resistance fleet arrived at the heart of memory, they found not a fortress but an open invitation. The inheritors stood waiting in the central chamber, their weapons drawn not in threat but in welcome. We know you fear what we represent, Sarah spoke through quantum communication to the resistance fleet, so come and see for yourselves. Test your strength against ours, but understand that we will not fight back. The Vegan commander's response crackled with hatred. You think this display of weakness will save you? We will destroy your weapons and free the galaxy from your influence. The attack that followed was devastating in its fury. The Resistance had developed weapons specifically designed to counter progenitor technology. Energy beams that should have torn through the heart structure, viral programs meant to corrupt the network connections, even reality-warping devices that attempted to sever the station's dimensional anchors. But the heart of memory was more than just a structure. It was an idea made manifest. A place where cooperation could exist across space and time. The attacks passed through it like light through crystal, absorbed and transformed into something beautiful rather than destructive. As the futile assault continued, something unexpected began happening aboard the Resistance ships. The suppressed genetic memories that their leaders had worked so hard to eliminate began stirring. The sight of the inheritor weapons being used purely defensively, the evidence of genuine cooperation rather than hidden domination, caused cracks to appear in the mental conditioning. One by one, Resistance ships began powering down their weapons. Their crews were remembering not just their true origins, but their original choice to reject those origins. Now they had to choose again, with full knowledge of what they were accepting or abandoning. The final confrontation came when the Vegan commander himself teleported aboard the Heart of Memory, energy weapon in hand, determined to destroy Sarah personally. He found her waiting in the central chamber, her sword laid aside, completely defenseless. Kill me if you want, she said simply, but know that my death won't change anything. The networks exist because people choose cooperation. The weapons are just tools. The real power comes from the choice to work together rather than dominate each other. The commander stood frozen, weapon aimed at Sarah's heart, as the truth of her words sank in. Around the galaxy, cooperative worlds continued functioning normally despite the absence of the inheritors. The networks had grown beyond their creators, becoming self-sustaining expressions of shared values rather than imposed systems. Slowly, the Vegan commander lowered his weapon. We could have chosen differently, couldn't we? From the beginning, we could have